I just want to start by saying, like, some of you may know a lot about IRB, or maybe a little bit, or maybe you don't really know anything about IRB, but these slides are really going to be just a very, very basic overview, and you know, all the details of what needs to happen with IRB, it really depends on the project. So just know there's a lot of details I'm not going to cover, and you know, like I said, Bozer can be there to help you, and you can also reach out to the wonderful people at IRB to ask any questions as well. And we have Rachel Wenzel from IRB on this Zoom meeting as well, and I'll have a little time at the end of this section so you can ask any questions to her if you want to ask IRB some things directly. So really, I just wanted to start with, you know, what is IRB? So IRB is the Institutional Review Board. It reviews and approves all human subjects research that's conducted or supported by someone at UNL, so be it faculty, students, staff, or other representatives. So really what this means for you is if you have a project that's going to involve human subjects research, you need to have it reviewed and approved by IRB before you can start on the project. So if you're wondering, like, how do I know if I have a human subjects research project? So I guess the first question then would be, how do I know if I have research? So if your project is going to be used for generalizable knowledge, and that's why I have it bolded in this definition, in that first bullet point, that's the key piece. So if you're using this for generalizable knowledge, then it's research. And even if you're doing an evaluation of a project, that can also be used for generalizable knowledge and can be considered research. So just a little example would be, say you have an extension program that you're evaluating, and you want to determine if it's meeting its objectives. So if you take the results and your processes and you share them with others so that they can use them and potentially then apply them themselves, that's when it becomes generalizable. Now, if you're conducting the evaluation and you're just saying, you know, here are our results and here's what we did, and this is not something that would be generalizable or that others are going to use, then that's just strictly evaluation and you wouldn't need to go through IRB. So that's kind of a quick overview of how you would determine if you have research, if you're doing research. And then, so how do you determine if you're doing research on human subjects? So really, it's if you're interested in conducting your research with people, or you're looking at individuals. So for example, like say you wanted to look at businesses. In that instance, if you're just looking at the business, then you're not researching human subjects, so you wouldn't need to worry about IRB. However, if you are looking at a business but you want to look at individuals within that business, then you're doing human subject research. So that's when you would need IRB. So really, this is just kind of a basic overview. Sometimes it can be hard to tease out if you need to go through IRB or not, if it really is research or not. But that's, again, Bozer and IRB is here to help with that piece. So just let us know if you ever have questions about this and we can help.
Kim?
Oh, yes.
So we get this question a lot, and I sometimes get confused on this whole IRB or not. If you're doing some data mining and you search by zip code, is that considered an identifiable? And then you make a generalization about zip code area, you know, this part of the country or this part of the region or whatever. Does that constitute a need for IRB approval when you're not identifying individuals?
You know what? I'll just let Rachel answer these questions just since she's on here.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kim, and I do appreciate the time to be able to talk with everybody, because I do agree with Kim when she notes that this is some of the most difficult decisions that a PI can make, especially within these gray areas, and I think we've already identified one of those as well too. And so the question was about what could be a secondary data source and whether or not maybe mining that data, and would a zip code potentially be identifiable? I think that most of the responses that I'll provide maybe today might be it depends, where this is a publicly available data set. We might not say that it would require IRB review and approval once you're past the definitions, and you do have to have both of those definitions assessed to meet the need for IRB review. So you determine that you're conducting research, but then Kim, if you could go back one slide to that definition, and really it's that human subject piece. And so we can reasonably assess that any information about a zip code potentially likely could have been generated by a human subject, but we're going to use more concrete information about that. And so then it really goes down to the private information through intervention or interaction, uses, studies, or analyzes the information or biospecimens. And so I guess it would really depend if we had some other piece of secondary data that might be identifiable about that individual. And so zip code alone, I likely would say, would not give us enough information to say that it is individually identifiable to one person. I think it would really depend on if there's other data associated with the zip code to be able to re-identify or identify somebody. So zip code alone, probably say no, but we'd also have to identify how we're obtaining that secondary data piece.
So to follow up on that then, we do these extension events and then we send out a paper survey or an online survey. And I know the online ones are a little more difficult because you can do IP addresses, but if you never associate the individual with the data, so you say 76% of you said you intend to do this, because we're doing that now. I think you probably realize that. We're doing this now, and I would almost guarantee that there are very few that are on this call right now that have actually gone through the structured determination of IRB approval. I want to make sure that this faculty understand that this is pretty important, but at the same time, it's not the lockdown that doesn't make it possible to collect data as long as it's not identifiable as to individual. Is that a fair assumption or not?
So no, I think what we need to be careful about is from the very beginning, before you do anything, you have to assess whether or not your project will meet the definition of research. And so there's two components of the human subject definition. So it's either intervention or interaction, or you're obtaining identifiable information from some other source or an identifiable biospecimen. So you could potentially be doing three different actions if you're involving a living individual. So you're either obtaining information about that person through an intervention, like a blood draw, or you're doing an interaction with that individual, so you're asking them to complete that survey. Or you're obtaining individual information about that person through either a HIPAA record, like a medical record, or a FERPA record, or you're obtaining an identifiable biospecimen, maybe from LabCorp or something like that, from a lab biospecimen that you provided to a doctor's office or something like that. So we have multiple things that might identify whether or not you're conducting research with a human subject. So really, before you start your project, you have to discern whether or not you're conducting research. And that's where Kim was explaining about the difference between program evaluation versus evaluation for research. And in most of the cases for extension or for Nebraska extension, I mean, from my understanding is you guys conduct a lot of program evaluation, and that's great. That's absolutely fine. Most of those things don't require IRB approval. So really, you have to really discern when you first start your project, or you first start maybe your evaluation procedures, is to evaluate yourself whether or not you're meeting that definition of research. And if you do, then you go on to the next definition of human subject. If you're meeting both of those definitions, then you seek IRB approval. It's not either or, it's both.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, yeah, and I'll say a lot of the program evaluation becomes research when it's published in journals and things like that. That's usually where we see the program evaluation become research.
Be careful about that because publication is not a litmus test for whether or not you need IRB approval. There's a lot of journals and a lot of publications that still allow and that really are focused on program evaluation and providing process and determination. So it's really based on, from the get-go, whether or not you believe you're conducting research, not necessarily whether or not you feel in the future you potentially want to publish.
Great. Any other questions on this? I know I didn't put this in here, but there's also, IRB has a predetermination form that you can complete in New Grant, and that's one way IRB can help you determine if you have, if it needs to go through IRB or not, if it is human subject research or not. So
I had a question. Okay. I'm just having a hard time. Are there questions that we should just definitely not be asking when it comes to program assessment to minimize these risks? Like traditionally you would ask, what kind of career do you have? So like in the turf industry, are you a golf course, lawn care, business? I mean, are these questions now that are like becoming identifiable that I should just say, what was things you learned at this program? What was, better? What could we do better? What could we do worse? Like it still seems kind of vague to me that even though it's not being thought of as research, as program assessment, we're getting pushed to try to publish these types of things. And so it starts to always be falling into potential research. And so can we just, are there questions we should avoid to minimize this when doing program assessment?
do you want to answer this too, Rachel?
Sure. Let me make sure I understand the question. So you're getting pushback maybe from journal editors or maybe from associations or other programs to publish research itself. Is that what I'm understanding?
I guess it's more about just like, if we're taking our extension and we want to make it scholarly and we want to start documenting that we're actually having an impact on whatever our industry is, are there things that we should just not be asking? And then does that diminish our data set because we don't really know the demographics of the people we're trying to see if they've changed their behaviors? Like if I don't know what these people are and what they're doing, then it's hard for me to assess, did they implement my programming to make a positive change in how they're managing their facility or their industry?
Yeah, that can be a very difficult balance to strike, I think. And, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you, but I will say the work that Bozer does, I think, is equally great, even if it is identified as research. And I've heard a lot of leading national experts really think about, IRB, is it big R where it's regulated research under the IRB, or is it little r where it's research, that's not regulated by the IRB? And there's many procedures and processes and types of evaluation or needs assessments that are just as rigorous as a research project, or even more rigorous than a research project that's been approved by the IRB. So I guess I would encourage everybody to not shy away from asking, the individual questions that you need in order to meet your goal or your objective. But really think about what your design is and what you need in the end to be able to meet, again, your objective or your goal. And I think that if you need help in communicating or trying to clarify whether or not IRB approval was necessary or needed for your project, that is definitely something that we can assist in. And I know that probably doesn't answer your question, but I think it's a difficult road to navigate for a lot of people. So I can appreciate that.
So how much time it takes to take an approval from IRB?
I'll ask you to, it's a good question. And I'll ask you to go to our website. Kim can maybe share that with everybody. We do publish our metrics in real time now. That has been an update a little over a month ago, where we are sharing our annual metrics for median review times, for change requests, continuing review, annual reports, new projects, final reports, and reportable new information. So we have those available for people to view. And then we also publish within the year and in real time up to the same day, and we republish at 1 o'clock automatically. So people can see maybe trends on where we're at for the year. So I'll have Kim share that website with you.
And I see Terry shared it in the chat box, and I also have it on my next slide.
Perfect.
So this slide I have right here is just a flow chart to kind of help navigate. I pulled this, a lot of the information I pulled is from your website, and this is one of the flow charts that's referenced on the website, and I have the actual location of the website down here at the bottom of the slide. So I'm not going to go through it, but just know that this is available and you can look through it if it's helpful for you. So then I just kind of wanted to go into generally what the process looks like for IRB. So now you figured out you are doing human subjects research, you need to go through IRB. So you're going to go complete the application at this website here called New Grant. If you're not familiar with it, you'll get a login and everything. It's fairly easy to navigate. And then you're also going to have to do, while you're doing your application, you're going to want to be completing your city training. And then you're going to once you submit your application, it's going to ask you about, it's going to have a conflict of interest statement about that particular project. So those are a couple things that you'll do while you're doing your application. You'll need supplementary materials with your application. So if you have consent forms, this is where you'll attach your survey questions. Any kind of recruitment material you're going to use will be on the application. And then if you have like a grant narrative or something, sometimes that needs to be included as well. And there's other things, and your IRB contact will let you know if you're missing anything. And I kind of go into that in this third bullet point here. So once you submit your application, IRB is going to do a pre-review, and then they'll let you know if they have any questions or if they see anything that needs fixed or if there's any documents that are missing. They'll also contact you then if basically any of the project personnel on the application are missing their city training or their conflict of interest. They'll let you know at that time, and you'll need to get it done. Those things can't, the application can't be approved until those things are all done. And then I know Rachel just talked about where you can, so I have the website here in bullet point 5. That's where you can go to their website, and you can see how long things take that Rachel was talking about. I will say it does take a little bit of time, and this isn't like you submit it and it's approved in a day. I mean, it takes a little time for them to look at it, all the materials. And then, questions during the pre-review are normal, so revisions are normal. That also takes a little bit of time to do those things, so that's something we always tell clients to keep in mind. Excuse me, but let's see, any other thing I wanted to say about that? I don't think so. So really, this is just kind of very basic of what happens. It depends on your project, you know, if it's exempt or expedited or full board, and there's so many details I could get into about this that we don't really have time for, but I put the website there so you can look. They have a lot of information on their website, and again, you can ask IRB for any questions that you have, and like I mentioned earlier, Bozer's here to help through the whole IRB process too. If you want to go that route, we can help you do it. So,
Kim, there's a question in the chat, and is there a cost associated with IRB vetting or review?
There's no cost from like IRB's standpoint. If you would need Bozer to help with it, we do a couple hours of free consultation, but anything beyond that, if you needed our help, then there would be some cost associated with it just for personnel time for helping you do it, but no cost for you, like if it was just you and IRB working on it.
Okay, thanks, Kim. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, but Chris Proctor, who's on this call, and Kim Todd and Terry James, as well as Keith Gluen, have all used your services in recent years, and they would be great resources for some of the Q&A. So just keep that in mind. Chris Proctor, Keith Gluen, and Kim Todd and Terry James.
Yes, and this. And you said were there some other questions in the chat? You said
that's it. There was a comment, and then
okay.
Yeah, that was it.
Perfect.
Kim, can I interrupt you before you keep going?
Sure.
Just a follow-up question. I'm just thinking of just kind of how extension often works, right? So we'll be going through our season, and something will come up of interest that we weren't anticipating. And it seems like there's an opportunity then to run a survey, and at that point it's not obvious whether it's going to evolve into research or not. And is there a possibility to quickly develop a survey, run it, and then look for approval after the fact, and then just sit on that data, right? And if it's not approved, if it wasn't done properly or with approval, then you just have to walk away from it. But does that make sense? Or just knowing how things often work practically, is there a mechanism that we could go about it that way, or do we have to pre-plan, right? When you're doing a grant or something, you pre-plan and you line these things out and you develop your questionnaire and all that, but there's times where being able to quickly survey and kind of gain and understand what's happening within a field season makes sense, you know.
We've never done that before or helped anyone with the IRB like that, so I think I'm going to again defer to Rachel and get her thoughts on if that would be okay or not.
That's another great question. I would encourage everybody to, let me step back. A former IRB chair, when I came to the institution 10 years ago, said it best, I believe. When you have a research objective, that is when you seek IRB approval. If you are developing a survey with a research objective, then if you move forward in that survey and you move forward in that process without IRB approval or certification of exemption, you are technically going to be in non-compliance, and we view that as serious non-compliance, regardless of whether or not we certify exempt or you're a non-exempt, expedited, or full board. With that said, now a lot of what extension does, you might need to put something in the field, a survey in the field, no pun intended for that, that maybe needs to do a needs assessment or something to that effect. And so I would maybe look to the expertise of Bozer to be able to identify what type of evaluation or what type of assessment is necessary in order for you to meet your short-term goal. And if you do have a long-term goal from the onset, then you unfortunately will need to plan accordingly for IRB approval. And that's why as the UNL Human Research Protection Program within Research Compliance Services, we do a very good job at identifying a deadline necessary fast track process. And so if you notify us, we can certainly make sure that we can move forward in a review process as quickly as we can if you have a legitimate reason to do so. Such as, hey, extension needs to really move forward on this. We have a short window of time because of growing season or something to that effect. Just let us know and we will work with that deadline and that process. The last thing we want to do is be seen as a barrier. I know sometimes the process can be daunting, but we will certainly work with you on those times needed and necessary. So I think again goes back to what's your objective? What do I want to do at this point in time? You know, potentially then you say, I have a needs assessment. I'm looking at this particular slice in time, and I want to be able to understand maybe what the community needs are for rural Nebraska, wherever you're at in the town or in the state of Nebraska. And then you receive the data, you do what you need to do for that season, and then you say, wow, I'd like to look at this and analyze this again for a research objective. That's when you would seek then a secondary data analysis and an IRB approval.
So you could have a data set that you use initially not for a research purpose, but then after looking at it, or you might change, and then before proceeding, then you would submit for IRB approval.
Yes, absolutely. I would just make sure that you're really, you know, you feel good about what your objective is, because that can be a slippery slope, and we'll certainly ask you a lot more questions on the second time around to make sure we understand why and what the original objective was.
Sure, no, that makes sense. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So long story short, yes, it's possible. Be careful though.
Thanks, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
And I can attest to how helpful you all are with if there is something that's urgent that, you know, we have a short window, a timeline, something we have to work with. They're always great at IRB of understanding and helping to get it out as, you know, get that approval done as fast as possible. So I can attest to that. So definitely don't be scared of IRB. And it, you know, I've only been working with IRB really these past year or so that I've really gotten familiar, and I'm still learning a lot too. So it did seem daunting at first. I can also attest to that. And once you kind of get a feel for it and understand it better, it's not that overwhelming. So yeah, great. And then I just wanted to quickly talk about city training and then conflict of interest a little further. Because I know city training can sometimes seem overwhelming. So this is a web-based training program about the protection of human participants, and then I just put the website there as an FYI of where you would need to go and sign up and complete the training. Excuse me. So this is a training you'll need to do in order to have your project approved through IRB. And then conflict of interest is the statement that's used to review potential conflicts of interest of the project personnel, and it's for that particular project. So every time you put in a project with IRB and your project personnel on there, you're going to get asked this conflict of interest statement. And it's just talking about that particular project. So
Kim, if I could add a little bit more on the
Yeah.
conflict of interest side, I think
Please
that
do.
this, so I just want to make sure that everybody on the call understands the difference between the IRB conflict of interest process and the interest and outside activity reporting form that is required for all faculty, staff, or students, one that are sponsored, that are conducting sponsored research, and what those processes are and what they do. So the interest and outside activity reporting form is your annual disclosure form that you have to complete. The IRB COI process is embedded into an IRB application so that we can more easily identify if there are potential conflicts with one project versus another, and so on and so forth. So again, the IRB COI is not the official COI process or disclosure process for the university. It's just a way for us to be able to better connect the IOARF with an IRB project. The IOARF, and I apologize, this is confusing how it's kind of set up at the university, so I wanted to take some time. The IOARF is your official disclosure form as a faculty, staff, or student. And if you're sponsored, that has to be completed in the interest and activity management module in New Grant. So I do apologize if anybody has any questions about that. Please feel free to follow up with me via email, but for the most part, your sponsored programs folks will be following up with you, or your grant liaisons or something like that as well, if you're required to do the interest and outside activity for a sponsored research application and things like that. So just wanted to make sure that that difference was clarified.
Thanks, Rachel. I know we've had some confusion too about it. So yes, separate IOA-RF form for conflict of interest for the university. For the purpose of, your IRB application approval, it's this conflict of interest statement that's separate from that. So, and then, city training and conflict of interest. So this has to be completed by the PI. If you have a secondary PI, they need to do these things. And then anyone that you have listed as project personnel on your application. And then, so when thinking about who should be project personnel, so like who do I mean when I say project personnel? There's a section where you can add people to the application, and you should be adding people as project personnel. So like anyone who's on your team who's going to be either in contact with the people you're studying, or they're going to be in contact with the data. So like, for example, if you have maybe a student helping you with your project, and maybe they're going to be recruiting people for your project, then they would need to be listed as project personnel, and they would need to do city training and do that conflict of interest statement. Or maybe they're going to be helping analyze data. So something to think about that I think sometimes gets overlooked is that who should be added to the IRB application. And then this is kind of an FYI, but with city training, you have to do a refresher course once every 3 years. So just know that if you did a project, you did city training, and then a few years down the road, you have a new project you're doing an application for, you might need to do your city training refresher course. And this course is a little shorter than the original course, but just something to keep in mind. And really, that's kind of all I had for this IRB section. So I think we have maybe like 5-10 minutes for any other questions. So if anybody has anything else they want to discuss, or Rachel, if you have any other things that you want to share that you think would be helpful for everyone to know.
I just want to also add that the IRB procedural stuff, I've heard faculty and other people saying, I'm not just saying our department, but when I was head, I'd hear other faculty and department heads say, oh, it's so onerous, oh, it's so this, but it is required. And with the staff at Bozer and as well as IRB office, they do everything they can to make sure we're compliant and those sort of things. So that'll just kind of underline what Terry was saying. They're there to help, and they're more than willing to do it. An example is today they took some time out to help us down the path a little bit as well. But being ignorance is not bliss in this case. I mean, you need to be cognizant of these sort of procedures and policies that are important, especially if you intend to go much beyond a real rudimentary, and even then it might be required. So yeah, just be careful, everybody.
And I have a question. Several of our extension programs are kind of repetitive. We do extension surveys 2 to 3 times during our field days and things like that. So if we work with you to develop a survey one time, can we use that repetitively in our program, or every time we have to approach you and it has to go through you?
So in that instance, if you're doing kind of a longitudinal project where you're surveying people at various steps of the evaluation you're doing or project. You would complete the original application for that entire process, saying what you want to do throughout that entire process. So, and at that point, then what you would do is, you filled out the application, you uploaded your materials that were going to be for your first stage of the process. And then periodically you'll do some change forms as needed. So if you have your materials ready for your next wave of surveys, if maybe they changed or something, you would just upload that and get approval there. Depending on how long it goes, you would maybe need to fill out like a continuing review form, which these are all the change forms, continuing review forms. These are really quick forms just to give IRB kind of an update and get their okay. So you wouldn't have to do a separate application for every single piece if this is one big long project or evaluation.
Okay. And just a follow-up question about taking approval from IRB. So if we are not collecting individual person's data, but we are asking for their opinion, we still need to take an approval?
It goes back to, again, is this research or not? Is this generalizable knowledge or not? So you're getting information from them. So be it identifiable information or just information about their opinions, I would say that's still like, is this research or not? Are you using it to generalize? And I don't know if Rachel, you want to say any more on that?
No, I would agree. I think that is appropriate. You start with the research definition, you move on to the human subject definition, which includes interaction, which would potentially maybe involve an opinion of somebody or from somebody. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kim or Rachel, I have a follow-up question. This is Martha.
Mm-hmm.
Many in our department in the teaching space have done IRBs, and this is a follow-up to what Amit asked. So oftentimes we do the same thing, like an extension event, it's the same thing. You're trying to do longitudinal data collection. If you are not making any changes to the survey question, how far can you extend that IRB? Is that a 2-year or 3-year? If you could clarify that, thank you.
Yeah, an exemption is valid for 5 years. After that 5 years, you then have to come back and you might have to submit the same application, but we then would reevaluate that exemption. And then you might be valid for another 5 years. Exemptions do not require continuing or annual review. And so if you want to use the same survey with the same population every year and we certify it exempt, then you can do that for 5 years without ever coming back to us. Now, if you are reviewed as a non-exempt, so expedited or full board, then you would have that project valid for 10 years, but every year you have to submit either a continuing review or an annual update, giving us just kind of a brief update of the project. And depending on the continuing review form versus the annual update, the continuing is required at the full board review level, which asks just a lot more information. The annual update, which is new under the 2018 requirements, is really just providing us a status update that it's still ongoing. So non-exempt, 10 years, but you have to report back to us. Exempt, 5 years. Don't have to tell us what you're doing until that 5 years is up, if nothing changes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you clarify the difference between exempt and non-exempt? What are those? What's the distinction?
So there's technically 8 exempt categories that a research study could fall under once you make it past the definitions of human subject and the definition of research. So there's 8 categories, and they're very specific to the type or the population of research that you're doing. So the 8 categories, the first category 1 is research in common educational settings that meet certain criteria. The second category is survey or interview research procedures with adults only. That can get a little bit interesting in the state of Nebraska with the age of majority as 19 years versus 18. So we do have to work through that process a little bit. So there's additional categories of review. If your research and all your procedures do not fit into one of those 8 categories, we then move you to an expedited review process, which includes a review of 1 member from the IRB, 1 designated IRB member from the, which would review your project as an expedited. So there are 7 review categories that all of your research procedures have to fit under. And if you don't fit into one or more of those 7 categories, and let's say 3 of your 4 research procedures could fit within an expedited review category, well, not all of them fit. So that's when you move to full board. And then your project is reviewed by all of the members of the IRB. And so either greater than minimal risk research, research with prisoners, or research that doesn't fit within one of the categories of exempt or expedited would move to a full board review. So there's different varying levels of review category, and that's kind of what we do during the pre-review process as well, is to be able to better understand and categorize your project. And that's where during the pre-review, we're going to get pretty technical in terms of whether or not you would need to have, for example, the key information section in a consent form because you're now required to meet certain regulatory criteria under an expedited review process. So that's, as Kim was discussing, kind of our pre-review process, once you guys preliminarily categorize your own project in the application form, that's when we will review the entire project. And if we have enough information to move it forward in the next step of the review process, either through the exempt or expedited or full board, that's when we'll kind of decide that category of review and review type. You may end up having a pre-review process that we're just really trying to kind of figure out all the moving parts as well too, to be able to categorize that. So those are the different varying levels of review type and review category. And those categories are also on our website under the review process.
Rachel, could you repeat the first one, please? Just because I think I have a follow-up question to the first one on the list.
Sure, the exempt for the first category that I mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah, so the first category for exemption would be research conducted in common educational settings. And we would not view the university as a whole as an educational setting. We're talking more like in a classroom where you are maybe involving, I don't know, UNL freshmen in a 101 course or something like that, and the course and your research will ask about different curriculum techniques that you're using. Maybe you want to try to learn if a certain clicker or something like that does better than having an open forum discussion or something.
So I based on what you just said, if I'm interpreting correctly, Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
What we do in extension is we teach. We just don't teach
Mm-hmm.
the normal, undergraduate, post-secondary, and elementary audience, right? But we do.
Mm-hmm.
We are informing. To me, that's educational. Would some extension type programs fall under that first one, and then be the potential for exempt?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a really great point to bring up. Yes, we do view a lot of the extension programming as potentially fitting within a common educational setting. I will say within like the 4-H framework and that program, we do see that as a common educational setting where extension does deliver a lot of content and a lot of educational based content to our broad state population. So yeah, we do place extension programs in exempt category 1, absolutely.
Okay, great. Because I was thinking specifically about the pesticide safety education program,
Oh,
which
yeah.
that PSEP would seem to fall under that first
Yeah.
category.
Yeah, I
Pretty
mean,
clear.
that's we might also place it into another category. If it's all adults, it might be easier for us to, or not necessarily easier, but there's not as much criteria that you have to meet for maybe an exempt category 2A versus exempt category 1.
Okay, great.
So we have some flexibility and some ability to move that about.
And once again, you're there as well as others to help in the process.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Rachel. Any other questions while we're, Terry said master gardeners also, because they're essentially adult learners as well. So
yeah,
I think we have a lot of examples of things going on. Also, there's a comment from Kim Todd. She mentions that the working with BSR was awesome. It's hard for me to say Bozer because for some reason that doesn't roll off the tongue.
That's
But
okay.
but IRB certification does take a long time, so don't plan on it being 15 minutes and a passing score. So just be aware that the IRB process is critical and necessary, but it's not going to be necessarily as expeditious. But with these openings, with the proper vetting, it seems like some, if not all of our programs, or many of our extended programs, would probably meet some of those criteria for exemption. Just have to figure it out, right? Great.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I'll leave everybody with kind of just the thoughts, and it doesn't take long to proofread a document or to review it for additional clarity, because I think what we find most often that creates a long review time is that we just we can't connect all of the dots to be able to identify, one, what the research procedures are, who the population is, which is really important for us to really know if you're working with adults, and the age range of that versus minors, because the exemption criteria is more restrictive for minors versus adults. And I would tell everybody just to take a moment and have somebody else maybe proofread your application going in for clarity, consistency, and really reading all of the questions and answering all of the questions that are in the application. I think that that's kind of what we find is can be a real barrier for us moving that through really quickly. And make sure you understand that the IRB website is separate and different from New Grant. We have a lot of guidance and templates and additional information for you to be able to make these assessments, whether or not you want to, go through an exemption. If you can conduct your research without an 18-year-old, and it takes us 2 weeks to certify a project versus going through the expedited review process with an 18-year-old as a minor. So think about those things, and they can really help you kind of move through that process. It looks like we have one more question.
If survey data is used for internal program impact evaluation, like a promotion and tenure document or annual activity insight, does that count as research in quotes? And then the person asking a question says, I'm assuming the answer is yes.
I would probably actually say likely not. I think that the key words here, you're saying that it's internal. It's a program impact evaluation. And I guess I would look at the different objective if there's maybe another secondary objective or something like that. But I don't think that would lead me to believe that it would be generalizable, where persons outside of that particular program would use that information in a manner that you would make generalizations about the target population as a whole. And I'll leave you with that. I think making the determination of whether or not you're conducting research with human subjects can be one of the most difficult determinations to make. So if you feel like you're in a gray area or you feel like you just don't know, that's okay, because I think, again, this is one of the most difficult questions to answer when you are conducting very important work in the area that Extension does, because you guys often fall within a lot of different needs for the state, for the university, for you as faculty members and staff to be able to do what you need to do for the university. So I'll leave you with that. And I think Kim did a great job at kind of giving an overview of the IRB process. And Bozer, we believe Bozer is a great partner in the research process, and we're happy that we get to work with them.
Great, thank you, Rachel.